The three stages of our spiritual life. The revelation of some very fundamental but long neglected existential as well as spiritual truths about being human. Almost everyone agrees that the attitude of worship or the need to worship is peculiar to human beings. To the extent that we know, other animals, birds, and the vegetable world do not worship God in the manner that we worship God. Whether or not they really worship God is something that even today we are in no position to either affirm or deny. Maybe they worship God after their own fashion, and I'm inclined to believe that that is the case because if I believe that God is the creator and everything that exists is on account of God, then it cannot be that the created order remains utterly unconscious of and indifferent to the creator. I believe that there is a dynamic relationship between the creator and the created, and therefore, even if the mode of responding to the creator varies from one form of creation to another, it is still a basic necessity that there is a form of dialogue or communion or reciprocity between the creator and the created. But in this video, let's not get into the subtleties of the other forms of life or the forms in which other manifestations of life express their worship or their need to worship. So, human beings have a fundamental need to worship. Either we worship God or we worship God substitutes. For example, hero worship. Those who cannot worship God uh, look here and there and find ordinary human beings who are found in certain circumstances of life and with an elaborate and uh, strenuous effort exalts them to the position of gods and worship them. That's called hero worship. Young men worship objects of beauty. Romantic love is not far from religion, as all of us know. So there is a need to worship. Um, Now, when we think of the origin of this need to worship, we come to the conclusion that the human inner life, the human soul, is programmed with, or is instinct with, or is coded with a desire for something beyond itself. Now, when we think of the self, there's an element of instability and insecurity that we associate with the self because the self is lodged in the transitory, in the ephemeral. It is perishable and is always conscious of the hour of death and the insecurity that it breeds. So, one aspect of the self is this rootedness in this world of transitoriness, the unstable, partial, and perishable world. The other half of the soul is this aspiration or longing or thirst for the enduring, the stable, the undying, the immortal, the eternal. So, the complexity of the human being and the human condition and our consciousness itself owes its logic to this reality that we are actually situated between two contrasting worlds. The one is partial and perishable, it is transitory, it has no endurance, it shifts from moment to moment, As Lord Buddha said, nobody can step into the same river twice because water in the river flows continuously. The river that you see this moment is not the river that you see the next moment. This world is like that. The only constant in this world, he said, is change. So we are living in an ever changing world. An ever changing world has no stability, nor is it perfect, because that which is perfect by definition cannot change. It has to endure as it is, because the moment anything about it changes, it ceases to be perfect. That's the problem with perfection. That's the reason why perfection as a realized state is unattainable in this world. At the same time, because of the uniqueness of being human, we cannot really abdicate or relinquish, renounce the thirst to be perfect. So, the peculiar spiritual condition in which we find ourselves is that we are embedded in an imperfect scheme of things, and the doctrine of the fall is an attempt, a mythological attempt to explain this reality, to remind ourselves forever that we are embedded in, we are situated in a system which is by definition imperfect. And imperfection breeds all forms of human suffering, limitations, etc. And we need to develop the ability to cope with whatever it goes with the imperfect scheme of things with that we are uh, meant to indwell. So, on the one hand, we do recognize this fact, and that impermanence is a necessary part of being human. At the same time, that doesn't explain the totality of being human. Even though we are imperfect vessels, even though we are earthen vessels, which can crack, which cannot have eternal endurance, within this earthen vessel is the longing for eternity. And this has been so from the very beginning of human consciousness. So, the two completely contrary dimensions of our life, one is rooted in the passing, transitory, perishable, finite, and the other, even as we are rooted in the partial and the transitory, the longing for the eternal, the perfect, the complete. Now, but for these two contrary factors coexisting, there would have been no religion in the world. So, if we want to understand ourselves, it's very important to realize that there are these two components, these two dimensions. Uh, and therefore, we have an affinity to both. We have an affinity to both. Now, with this as a background, let's look at the three stages of our spiritual evolution. The starting point is this aspiration to the eternal, this aspiration to the divine, the aspiration to be perfect. Now, I remember when I was a little boy, I used to sit alone and dream of the years to come when I would attain great states of human achievement, great levels of human achievement. I would outgrow all my many limitations, and I would be doing wonderful, profound, meaningful things and make significant contributions to the welfare of humanity and all that kind. I used to dream. So, based on that, I can tell you that, like me, every one of you, at least during certain phases of your life, have entertained this aspiration to something far higher that ordinary humanity is capable of or heir to. Why does that happen? Why is that so characteristic of being human? Why is that such a precious aspect of being human? Now, think of two human beings. One who is driven by this aspiration, this higher aspiration. I don't have the linguistic power to convey to you the profundity of that aspiration. I request you to sit for a moment silently and imagine the sublimity of that aspiration lurking within you, working within you, dwelling within you, like the sun in the universe, uh, and becoming a very, very important aspect, a powerful aspect of your being. That's one condition. The other condition is There is no such aspiration. You're like the pig, for example. Jesus uses that image. That's the reason why I'm using that image. Completely untouched by or incapable of feeling any such aspiration. Totally content with whatever is at the moment. No inclination to look beyond one's nose, beyond the pales of today, living from hand to mouth, incapable of any higher emotions, higher aspirations, which is a better state of human personality. I'm sure everyone will agree that the first is certainly incomparably superior and therefore more desirable than the second. So that's why I'm saying that the most significant thing about us is this aspiration. This aspiration. So it's a reality. And I believe that the story or the myth recorded at the beginning of the Bible, the story of the creation and the fall of man, is an attempt to highlight this aspect of being human. On the one hand, there is the emphasis on the sublimity of human creation, the uniqueness of human creation. We are certainly shaped out of the mud of the earth. At the same time, what animates us and what makes us a living soul is the breath of God. There is a combination of the earth and the divine, the earthy and the divine. So that is the mixture that we are, the mixture of the sublime and the terrestrial that we are. So, within this earthen vessel, therefore, we contain something, we hold something beautiful, which is the aspiration towards the divine. That is our state. And every human being has this very wonderful, really adorable inner possibility. And Jesus expresses this very beautifully through a poetic image. You find that in the 5th chapter of Matthew's Gospel. In the past, I have made repeated references to it. Matthew chapter 5, verses 14, 15, 16, where Jesus says, "You are the light of the world. No one lights a candle and put a lamp and puts it under a bushel." Now, this image of the lamp lit and kept under a bushel is the condition that I'm referring to. The earthen vessel and the aspiration towards the immortal that human beings have. Or most of our life is lived in ordinary, humdrum concerns of life. At the same time, there are moments when our head would be dancing among the clouds. We may drag our feet through the mud of the earth, but our soul may be with the cosmos. I'm sure all of you have had such experiences. There is, of course, an attempt to deny this other dimension, and that's because of the triumph of materialism. And the materialistic worldview, the second dimension, the spiritual dimension, is a myth. It is the invention of people who have nothing better to do. Whether or not that dogma helps you or not, it's up to you to decide. I have found it an extremely dangerous and sinister assumption which reduces the scope of my being, and therefore I shall not accept it under any circumstance whatsoever. So, this is the first stage, the lamp under the bushel. The fact that the lamp is under the bushel does not mean that it doesn't emit light. It emits light continuously, or it has the potential to illumine the world around at all times, but unfortunately, it doesn't become a felt reality because its potential to spread light or express its light is hindered by a particular arrangement, that is the arrangement of this imperfection that I'm talking about, the dominance of matter over the spirit, the dominance of the world over the soul, the dominance of the transient, the perishable, the partial, and ultimately futile over that which is enduring, that which is beautiful, that which is eternal. So that is the first stage. The second stage is, given the right moment, right conditions, right circumstances, this longing for the eternal, the longing for the perfect, the longing for the imperishable, finds its expression. In other words, to use Jesus' metaphor, the bushel covering the lamp is lifted ever so gently, ever so tentatively, but light begins to shine. So at that point in time, this, the person concerned proceeds from a mere sporadic awareness of the divine, which comes to every human being now and then in the rare and random moments of one's life, sometimes without any obvious reason for it. The knock at the gate, as it were, it comes, but we ignore it. But on certain occasions, this knock assumes very special significance. The bushel shifts, the light comes out, and then it expresses itself, or the person concerned experiences this as love for God. So the first word I used is aspiration. Now I'm introducing another word, love. Universally, human beings don't have any love for God. They only have an aspiration to God, aspiration to be one with God, aspiration to be with God. That is universal, there's no question about it. Now, the fact that there is this aspiration towards God exists within oneself is no proof that this will find expression or this will proceed to the next stage of loving God. There are so many things in this world, so many factors in this world which hinder the progression from mere aspiration to the experience of love. This is true also on the human plane. A young person may feel love or feel aspiration towards X, Y, or Z, maybe a beautiful girl or whatever. But due to the pressure of circumstances, it may never blossom into love. It may be economic disparity, it may be intellectual disparity, it may be the sheer force of circumstances, this may be some misconception, some prejudice, so on and so forth. For example, in a context which is ridden by class consciousness or caste consciousness, a Dalit boy falling in love with a high caste girl, beautiful girl whom he adores, may not stand any chance of his love blossoming into a reality. So the fact that he aspires to her hand doesn't mean that it will blossom into love, which is mutually reciprocated or shared. The same thing with spiritual love, love for God. So, in certain instances, as I said, the bushel lifts, the light finds expression, and immediately that this light, the light of the individual, which remained hidden till then, connects to the source of eternal light, which is love, God as love, and the person concerned, for once in his life or her life, begins to experience love for God. That's the most significant moment in the life of a human being, when the mere inchoate, embryonic, shapeless, nebulous aspiration towards God now has become love for God. Now, if you want to understand this through an illustration, think of what is recorded in the first chapter of the Gospel of Mark, where Jesus called Simon and his brother Andrew. Both of them had this aspiration to God, but it remained as it was from the beginning without finding any catalytic influence on it. So one day Jesus came along and he sensed it. And he said, "Come, follow me, and I shall make you fishers of men." And immediately they left their boat and their net and followed him. Meaning, they were ready, they were like a ripe fruit. The aspiration to the divine in them was so strong. At the same time, the circumstantial burden, the pressures, or the inhibiting factors were too strong that they could not really take this next step forward. That at the word of Jesus, suddenly the bushel lifts and they become one. So, love between a human being and God is formed, is born at that time. That is a significant moment. that Jesus refers to in his conversation with Nicodemus as the experience of being born again. It is this moment, this critical moment, when the light hidden under the bushel of our earthly existence begins to connect to the eternal source of light, which is God, and love, spiritual love between the individual and his creator is born. That is the moment which Jesus marks or denotes as the experience of being, or the moment of being born again. From that moment onwards, the person concerned enters a completely different realm of life, a different dimension of life, the fourth dimension, if you like, of life. So, from mere aspiration, now the individual has passed to love. Through love, the person attains the next stage, which is not far from there. That is the stage in which we find Jesus Christ. How does Jesus express his relationship with God? In the 30th chapter of John's Gospel, verse 30, we read, in the 10th chapter of John's Gospel, verse 30, we read Jesus saying, I and my Father are one. That sense of utter oneness, which everyone will agree is possible only through absolute love. So, three stages: mere aspiration, the birth of love between God and human beings, and finally, the attainment of a state of perfect oneness with God, a state in which the individual is completely transformed, and the difference between the human and the divine is eliminated, and we become one with God. It is underlining, or it is referring to such a possibility that John in his Gospel, chapter 1, verse 12, he says, to all who received him, to all who believed in his name and received him, to them he gave the authority to become the children of God. The idea of being children of God is the idea of being in love with God, or the idea of loving God naturally without any strain, at which stage there is no hypocrisy. Religion is riddled with hypocrisy because it is still in the first stage or even before the first stage. It is not characterized by true love of God, because if there is true love of God, there is no scope for any priestly mediation. So, in the final stage, there's absolutely no need for religion, no need for any priestly mediation, no need for any prop. You begin to become the natural and spontaneous or transparent medium through which the will of God is expressed, the will of God concerning the world is expressed. That is the final stage of our evolution, spiritual growth, spiritual evolution. And it is this blessed state that Jesus refers to when he says that I and my Father are one. It is into this blessed state that Jesus calls his disciples. And that's why he says, abide in me and I in you. And you find this in Jesus' total strategy. For example, first he calls people to himself, as he did, as I've already referred to in the case of Simon and his brother Andrew. They were sitting and mending their nets. Jesus says, follow me. So he's calling people to himself. He's activating the hidden lamp. He's removing the bushel from the lamp so that light can be, for the first time, light can begin to shine. But that's not the end of the story. Having called Simon and his brother Andrew, like the other 10, he enables all the 12 to grow gradually into a state of oneness with him. That's called love. The 3 years of training that Jesus had with his disciples were years of training in the art of loving God. We all have to be schooled, taught, trained in the art of loving God. Because by nature, what we have is love for the world. From that, we have to be de-schooled and oriented towards loving God. So, that's the scope of spiritual training. Spiritual training is nothing but taking up a person in the natural condition of loving the world and the world alone, and reorienting the person towards a state in which he loves God. And because he loves God, he loves his fellow human beings and loves the world as a whole in a different way. Not loving the world, not in the worldly manner, but loving the world in a godly manner, which is the logic of the spiritual mission to the world. Loving the world in the worldly manner makes us slaves of the world. Loving the world in the godly manner makes us missionaries to the world. A missionary is one who brings godly good to the world, as against being a parasite on the world or a dependent slave on the world or even a destructive element in the world, whatever it is. Uh, Godly love for the world results in the redemption of the world. Redemption is the uh, the attempt to activate the enormous potential for good which is already latent in the world. Because after all, this world is created by God and God found it good. So its capacity for good is enormous, unlimited. But again, it remains unexpressed because of a certain aberration that has come into it. Godly mission to the world is to remove those agents of aberration so that light begins to shine. And then from that to the next stage, which is a state of absolute oneness with God. I am in God. So this is the very simple structure that I can provide to understand the spiritual growth through which we need to pass. And it's only through the spiritual growth that we can attain any degree of confidence regarding one's eternity. To say that I believe in eternal life without going through this process of spiritual growth is tantamount to deceiving oneself. And a church which makes or forces people by way of arrangement, Sunday service, to repeat this article of faith that one believes in eternal life is actually forcing people to utter falsehood. It's an utterly unspiritual and reprehensible task. To make people repeat something which they do not mean is the same as making them utter falsehood before God, which is a source of spiritual corruption, is an utter disservice to human beings. And therefore, I have serious discomfort with this practice of congregational affirmation of the articles of faith. Faith is not something to be limited to one's lips. Faith must become the very grammar of life. Unfortunately, that's not how it is understood. Anyway, I hope we have attained some clarity regarding the spiritual growth that needs to happen in the case of every human being. If this growth does not happen, our life remains subject to the law of futility, the law of waste, and the law of barrenness and fruitlessness that Jesus talks about, which is the utter condemnation of the life of a human being. And Jesus uses very strong words for it in the parable of the talents. Such people, such lives should be condemned to the outer darkness because it is repugnant in the sight of God. So I thank you for taking interest in this topic, and I'm sure that we'll continue to meditate on this and attain further degrees of clarity regarding this very important theme, which is suffused right through the four Gospels. Thank you, and have a very blessed day.